Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we are diving deep into one of the most quietly unfolding but dangerously impactful developments in Eastern Europe, a story that has been whispered in corridors of power, negotiated behind closed doors, and hidden from public view for months. This is the revelation of Russia's silent crisis, a crisis rooted in fuel shortages, collapsing infrastructure, economic pressure, and geopolitical risks, forcing Moscow to turn toward Belarus in ways the world has never seen before. What we are witnessing is more than a fuel agreement. It is a strategic dependency, a political lifeline, and a sign that Russia's internal systems are far weaker than they appear on the outside. Today, you are going to hear the full detail of how these secret fuel deals were formed, why they were hidden, and what they mean for the future of Russia, Belarus, and the wider global economy. Russia has long portrayed itself as an energy superpower, a nation that supplies oil and gas to Europe, China, and dozens of global partners. But beneath the surface, years of sanctions, logistical failures, aging refineries, and disrupted trade routes have pushed the country into a position where it can no longer sustain its own domestic fuel demand. This fact is rarely acknowledged publicly, but now evidence is emerging that Moscow has been quietly negotiating fuel deliveries from Belarus to prevent internal shortages, rising prices, and potential unrest. These agreements have been wrapped under layers of diplomatic secrecy, but the pressure has grown too big to hide. Over the past year, Russia has faced refinery explosions, drone attacks on energy facilities, shortages of spare parts, and restricted access to global markets. The price of gasoline inside Russia has surged uncontrollably at times, prompting emergency government interventions. Many regions reported fuel lines, supply delays, and rationing. Farmers struggled during harvest seasons, and transportation networks faced rising costs. All of these signs indicated a deeper crisis that officials tried to downplay, but inside the Kremlin the message was clear. Without external help, Russia risked facing a national fuel breakdown. Belarus, although smaller, holds significant refining capabilities inherited from the Soviet era. The Mozyr and Naphton refineries remained some of the most advanced in the region and were capable of producing gasoline that Russia increasingly needed. Despite the political tension, Belarus has remained economically tied to Moscow, but in the past 2 years, these ties became more transactional, more strategic, and more pressing. Russia approached Belarus for quiet fuel shipments disguised as commercial exchanges, emergency stocks, and even temporary resource management support, to avoid admitting domestic weakness. Belarus agreed, but not without negotiating its own advantages. Belarus saw the crisis as an opportunity to strengthen its position. The government in Minsk was aware that Russia's dependency gave them leverage they had not held before. This leverage opened the door for additional financial support, discount deals on raw crude, and greater political protection. Moscow, needing fuel stability, had little choice but to accept. These negotiations stretched for months, involving energy officials, military planners, transportation ministries, and covert infrastructure arrangements. The secrecy surrounding the talks was so tight that even many regional governors inside Russia were unaware that Belarus was quietly propping up their fuel supply. As the crisis deepened, Russia began routing crude oil toward Belarus not to sell it, but to be processed and returned as finished gasoline. This reversed the traditional flow of trade. Belarusian tankers began moving across the border under obscure logistical codes, labeling deliveries as industrial mixtures, resource transfers, or special category exports. These descriptions were designed to evade formal reporting systems. keeping the true scale of Belarusian support hidden from domestic and foreign observers. Political implications of these hidden deals are enormous. Russia's energy independence has always been a core part of its identity and global influence. Admitting dependency would have undermined this image. That is why Moscow insisted on secrecy. Belarus, however, benefited strategically. The country's leadership used the leverage to push for additional military support, security guarantees, and economic concessions. What seemed like a simple fuel transaction quickly grew into a multi-layered geopolitical exchange with far-reaching consequences. At the same time, ordinary Russian citizens had no idea that their gasoline supply depended on a neighboring state. Fuel shortages were often blamed on seasonal demands, technical failures, or temporary disruptions. But behind every public statement was a hidden reliance that officials were desperate to keep under control. Russian analysts, who traditionally emphasized the strength of the domestic energy sector, began noticing anomalies in supply chains, unexplained surges in imported refined products, and irregularities in energy stock reports. These clues gradually revealed the reality: Russia was no longer capable of meeting its own fuel needs without help. Belarus, while benefiting, also faced risks. Supporting Russia's fuel crisis meant taking on additional refinery workload, managing international scrutiny, and navigating sanctions that targeted both countries' energy sectors. By participating in secret deals, Belarus risked attracting investigations and potential penalties, yet Minsk was confident that the political advantages were worth the gamble. Inside Russia's regional networks, the crisis had been building silently. Many refineries were operating at reduced capacity. Spare parts from Western suppliers had been cut off due to sanctions. Technicians struggled to maintain aging equipment. Drone strikes on critical facilities caused temporary shutdowns, which then cascaded into wider shortages. Russia attempted to compensate by increasing crude exports to friendly countries and buying refined gasoline back. But these methods were expensive, inefficient, and politically sensitive. Turning to Belarus was the simplest and most discreet option. As months passed, the dependency increased. Russian refineries were unable to recover quickly, and Belarus began supplying more than just emergency shipments. Entire regions became reliant on Belarusian fuel. Agricultural zones, industrial cities, and transportation corridors all depended on these hidden deliveries to maintain operations. Without Belarus, Russia would have faced wider shortages, public unrest, and economic instability. The fear of domestic backlash was one of the main reasons the Kremlin kept the deals secret. Meanwhile, international analysts who began studying satellite imagery noticed irregular nighttime activity at Belarusian border crossings and increased tanker movement near Mozyr and Naftan. These observations sparked new questions about whether Belarus was quietly supplying Russia with more than what official reports claimed. Over time, the evidence became overwhelming. The silent crisis was no longer just speculation. It was a structural dependency. Inside Moscow, officials debated how long the arrangement could continue. Some believed the crisis would ease within a year. Others warned that Russia's refining sector would struggle for much longer due to technological isolation. These warnings were not welcomed, but they reflected a growing internal concern that the country was far more vulnerable than expected. The geopolitical consequences expanded beyond energy. As Russia leaned on Belarus, their political alignment tightened. Military cooperation increased. Economic integration accelerated. Belarus found itself in a stronger bargaining position, while Russia became increasingly dependent. This dynamic reshaped the relationship between the two countries and sent signals to the world about Russia's internal weaknesses. The revelation of these secret deals has shocked analysts because it reveals a side of Russia that is rarely seen. A nation unable sustain its own core industries, relying on a neighbor to maintain stability. This is not just a fuel story, it is a story of shifting power, hidden vulnerabilities, and a silent crisis that could reshape the region's future. The crisis also reflects broader global patterns. Countries that rely heavily on sanctions, sensitive industries are at risk of sudden collapse when external pressures combine with internal weaknesses. Russia's situation is a prime example. Its fuel sector, once a symbol of strength, has now become an indicator of systemic fragility. If these secret deals had not been exposed, Russia might have continued concealing the extent of its dependency. But now the world has a clearer picture. Belarus, on the other hand, may see short-term benefits, but long-term consequences remain uncertain. Relying too heavily on Russia for political and economic protection could limit Belarus's independence. Yet for now, Minsk appears confident in the leverage it holds. The fuel deals have strengthened their influence, but also tied them more deeply into Russia's economic future. As these revelations spread, the global energy market is beginning to react. Investors are reconsidering the reliability of Russia's energy output. Neighboring countries are reassessing their fuel security strategies. Even nations far from Eastern Europe are watching closely, understanding that any disruption in Russian fuel production can affect global pricing, shipping routes, and energy supplies. The silent crisis reveals the importance of transparency, stability, and resilience in national energy systems. When such systems become politically manipulated, ignored, or hidden, the consequences can be severe. Russia chose secrecy to protect its image, but secrecy has limits. Once exposed, the scale of the crisis becomes impossible to dismiss. The situation also highlights the role small countries can play in global geopolitics when larger powers face internal weaknesses. Belarus, often seen as dependent on Russia, suddenly became a crucial part of Moscow's survival strategy. This reversal of power dynamics is rare and significant. As we look toward the future, the critical question is whether Russia can recover its refining capacity, restore domestic production, and reduce dependency on Belarus. Experts believe this will require enormous investment, access to modern technology, and major reforms. But with ongoing sanctions and geopolitical tensions, such recovery may be slow or even impossible in the short term. Ultimately, Russia's silent crisis has revealed vulnerabilities that the world was never meant to see. The secret fuel deals with Belarus are just one piece of a much larger puzzle, exposing weaknesses, dependencies, and strategic shifts that will shape Eastern Europe for years to come. What started as hidden negotiations has now become a global story of geopolitical fragility.